So to get us started, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Grace Smith-Vidaurre. Dr. Smith-Vidaurre is an assistant professor in the Department of Computational Mathematics, Science, and Engineering, and also in the Department of Integrative Biology. She is also an 1855 professor, a title named after the year MSU was founded, and is one of the highest honors the university bestows on its faculty. Dr. Smith-Vidaurre leads the Behavior Integrated with Data Science Lab, or BIRDS Lab, which focuses on the functions of socially learned vocalizations and the early life sensitivity of vocal learning. The social learning vocalizations, or vocal learning, is a building block of human language, but several mammalian and avian taxa are capable of this form of learning as well. In Grace's presentation, you will learn how changes in vocalizations can be used to communicate different types of information and identity. It will include examples of human code switching, examples of how birds may also engage in vocal code switching, and she will explain that in her presentation. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Grace Smith-Vidaurre.
Thanks for that introduction, Dean Hegg. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm very excited to be telling you all about the science that's going on in my lab. And I want to start by talking about what we can consider part of the universal human experience. And let me just make sure that my slides are advancing correctly. There we go. So many of us have the experience of traveling to different parts of the US. So traveling to parts of the country where people speak the same language as us, but they sound different. This phenomenon can be thought of or considered vocal dialects. And these vocal dialects, or these regional dialects, reflect the fact that as humans, we learn how to speak from the others around us, both from a very early age, but also throughout our lifetimes. And so this ability we call the social learning of vocalizations, or vocal learning. And I want to highlight this using a sort of silly example from a quiz that I took in the New York Times. This is a quiz that was published in 2013, if you're interested in finding it. This quiz asks you a series of questions and then builds a map of how you sound with respect to the rest of the country in the English language. So this is my regional vocal dialect map in the English language. In this map, you can see that redder parts, or darker red parts of the map, indicate parts of the country where people sound most similar to the way that I speak English. And blue areas are places where people sound different from me. So according to this map, I should sound very different to people here in Michigan. And what I'm very fascinated by in the human experience is the fact that we, as vocal learners, can change how we speak in different social contexts. And to highlight this idea, or code switching idea, I want to talk more about this food that you're seeing up here on the screen, which some of you may have consumed earlier today. So this is a food that I call a bagel. And so this is sort of a phonetic pronunciation here. This is a bagel, but folks in other parts of the US can call this a bagel. I've also heard other pronunciations like bagel, and there may be many others that you've heard. So none of these pronunciations are wrong. In fact, they are all right. And they all reflect the fact that we learn how to speak from the people around us, and we modify this in real-time social interactions. And so, as an example, if I were to travel to a place where people say bagel, and I'm a person who pronounces this as bagel, I could choose to code switch in real-time interactions with others in order to streamline communication with the people around me. But if my pronunciation of this word is very important for my cultural identity, and I want to continue to communicate variation in my cultural identity with respect to others, then I might continue to say bagel even when the other people around me are saying bagel. And so this is an example of not code switching very intentionally. And so this is sort of a lived experience that we all have as humans, regardless of where we live or what language we speak, or languages in many cases. But we are not alone in this ability to communicate identity in our learned vocalizations. So there are many non-human animals that are also capable of this social learning of vocalizations, and we have evidence that they're actually modifying these vocalizations to communicate information about their identities in very complex ways. And so the examples that I like to start with are the parrots. Parrots are a very important part of my research program. This parrot that you're seeing up at the top of the screen is called a monk parakeet. It's actually distributed in different parts of the world now, including the US, and you'll hear about that a bit more. Over the last 10 years, my research has shown that these parrots produce individually distinctive learned vocalizations. And we think that this is really important for communicating individual identity in complex social environments. But other parrots that are pretty closely related over evolutionary timescales use their learned vocalizations to communicate very different types of information. So this yellow-naped Amazon, this very large parrot that's popular in the pet trade, in the wild exhibits regional vocal dialects that are very similar to the vocal dialects we experience in human language. And we think that these are very important for communicating group membership in real-time social interactions. And finally, other parrots exhibit even more complex forms of encoding or sharing information. This orange-fronted conure that's native to part of Mesoamerica engages in rapid vocal matching, so they can rapidly change how they sound similar or different to others in real time. And this may be very similar to the bagel example that I was telling you about, code switching in real-time social interactions. And so in my research program, when I talk about this, usually the first question that people ask is, what do you mean by information encoding? How are these animals actually encoding information in their vocalizations? And so here I want to highlight an example of what I mean by this. So here you're looking at a visual representation or an image of a parakeet social call. This image is called a spectrogram. Some people might call this a sonogram. On the x-axis, you're looking at time in seconds. The y-axis is frequency, and this is what we perceive as pitch by the human ear. And there is a third axis, amplitude. So amplitude is coming out of the screen towards you, such that darker parts of that sound are louder parts of the sound. And so here, what I want you to focus on are these patterns, these hills and valleys of changes in frequency over time, or the shape of a vocalization itself. So animals can encode information about their identities by changing that shape through learned modifications. So this individual, for instance, that is producing this call could diverge from other individuals to sound different from others. So this is an example here, individual number 2, that's producing a social call that has a very different overall shape than individual 1. But these birds can also choose to converge with others. So individual 1 might choose to produce a very similar call structure to individual 2, and this would be an example of communicating group membership. And so in my research program, I'm very interested in asking how this form of information encoding and vocalizations, or code switching, changes over different timescales. And so I have some different interacting components of my research program. You're seeing some research that overlaps with ecology and evolution, asking questions about the diversity of information encoding in different social environments. We have some research that overlaps with neuroscience, asking more about how developmental experiences could shape this information encoding. And of course, in service of these biological questions, we apply many computational approaches, including machine learning, to analyze the complex biological data sets that we work with. And we also engage in research software development. So we develop new tools for collecting, curating, and making inferences about behavioral data. And so all of these pieces interact in different ways. And I want to take you through 2 projects in more detail, and then I'll end with a short summary of a third project as well. The first project I want to tell you about is some past work with the monk parakeets that produce these individually distinctive vocalizations I was telling you about. This is work that I performed with my collaborators Tim Wright and Valeria Perez Marufo. Tim is at New Mexico State University, and Valeria was my former undergraduate mentee and is now doing a PhD in humpback whale bioacoustics with conservation applications. And I'm really proud of her achievements. So I want to tell you more about the birds themselves. So these parrots are very similar to humans. They are lifelong vocal learners, so they're able to learn new vocalizations throughout their lives in a way that's very similar to us, and they live in very complex social groups. Their sort of social environment is very much centered around the fact that they are unique amongst parrots, by building these stick nests that you can see. So those sort of messy structures that you can see, these were photos taken during fieldwork in South America in 2017. Those structures are stick nests. The birds spend a huge amount of their time collecting sticks and jamming them all together, and they build nests that are both colonial, so the birds can build nests very close to one another in space, but they can also be communal, so many birds will actually share the same nest structure. And you may see also an image of the parakeets nesting in a windmill. This was in Uruguay, so they nest in all sorts of natural trees, but also artificial structures. And sometimes there can be hundreds of birds at a nest site, so there's a true cacophony of noise and social interactions happening all the time. Now, these birds have been transported through the pet trade to many different parts of the world. And here I've highlighted a map where you can see in dark blue their at least contemporary native range in temperate South America. And in gold, I've highlighted parts of the world where they've been introduced and established new populations through the pet trade. And so recent work with some collaborators indicated, using trade data from around the world, that Uruguay is a country that's a particularly important source for naturalized populations around the world. And this was really important because it means that we can use this species as a natural experiment of population disruption. So we can compare behavior from birds in their native range and birds in the introduced range and ask, how do these behaviors change? And in this case, I was very interested in asking how information encoding in learned vocalizations might change. And I want to walk you through some of our reasoning for this. We collected lots of data from these birds. We went to 5 different states in the US and took recordings. We also had recordings from research I'd done in Uruguay in 2017. These were all wild birds. And we also collected information about how many nests there were at a nest site where we recorded, and made estimates of how many birds were present as well. And so in this work, we were very interested in testing the possibility that the process of introduction to a new part of the world is highly disruptive. This process should disrupt native range populations such that introduced populations are much smaller following introduction and may never recover to the native range population sizes, as you can see here. So in blue, you're seeing a line with large populations that we see in the native range. In gray, you're seeing this period of transport where birds often do die, and so population sizes decrease. And then once they're often escaping or being released into the wild in parts of the US, around the world, this happens because the birds are awful pets. They're truly not the animals that you want to have in your home. I personally have a parrot at home, and I think my hearing has suffered for it. And so for people who are very frustrated with these animals will let them loose, and so they establish new populations, but these populations shown in gold are very small, and they may never reach those original sizes that we see in the native range. And this is important because the number of individuals in a local population should change the social environment and the signaling environment. And so here, this is a very conceptual example, but I want to highlight that when you're communicating with more individuals, it's very, very hard to sound unique. So imagine being at a Halloween costume party, and there are hundreds of people. And this is a competition, right? You wanted to win a prize for the most unique costume. It would be very hard to have a unique costume if you showed up dressed as Darth Vader, and there are hundreds of other people, right? One other person is very likely to have dressed as Darth Vader. But in a smaller sort of costume party, if you're gunning for the prize and Darth Vader is the costume that you have, it's much less likely that someone else has the same costume that you do. And so this is what we expected to see in these birds. We expected that they would encode more information in these frequency modulation patterns or changes in frequency over time that I was telling you about earlier. And in smaller local populations, we expected that these acoustic structures would be simpler. And so these are the results that I want to walk you through today. So we started with visual comparisons of the parakeet social calls. Here, you're looking at a collection of these spectrograms. So I'd shown you some of these before. In the blue column, on the left are 3 exemplars of 3 different calls representing 3 individuals from the native range, and you're seeing a similar set of examples from the introduced range. Now, you may not be able to see some of these differences, but I really want to point your eyes towards the number of peaks or hills that you're seeing in these frequency modulation patterns. Visually, you may be able to tell that there are more of those peaks in the native range compared to the introduced range. And we used different machine learning tools to really quantify differences in the calls that we recorded from these birds. And so here, I know I'm taking you very quickly through these results, but in this plot, what I want you to pay attention to is the fact that these density contours, the blue ones for the native range and the introduced ones are in gold, these are pretty separate in this space. And we saw very high classification back to the original range where we recorded these vocalizations, indicating that these calls indeed were structurally different between ranges. So we knew they were structurally different, but we didn't know in which ways they were structurally different. And so here, we used approaches to trace the frequency contours, or those peaks and valleys of frequency over time. These were semi-automated approaches that we used for these vocalizations. And then we used computational tools to create smoother contours and measure the peaks and valleys in these patterns per call, per individual. And so here I'm showing you some representations of what these curves look like. You may be able to see as red X's indicating the peaks in these contours, and the triangles that are in blue indicate the valleys. And so this labeling allowed us then to calculate how many peaks were there and other sorts of parameters, including the slope of that modulation. And so once we summarized or quantified the variation that we were seeing in these structural features of the vocalizations, we did find that the structural features, these frequency modulation patterns, were simpler in the introduced range, which is what we had expected to find. And so I know I'm running through this quickly, but some of the measurements that we took involved the number of peaks and also the modulation rate, so the number of peaks divided by the duration of the call. And we expected higher numbers to indicate greater complexity, which we saw in the native range, which had larger populations. And so these results were very exciting. And sort of as a reminder, I keep saying this, but up there you're seeing the data about actual sort of numbers of nests and numbers of birds and flocks that we saw in the native range compared to the introduced range. We did see differences in local population sizes between these ranges, and we also found differences in the complexity of the structural features where we think the parakeets are encoding individual identity information. And so overall, our takeaway from this study was that the amount of information about individual identity that these birds encode in their vocalizations was sensitive to this process of population disruption. But the type of information did not change. And that's from a sister paper to the paper that I'm talking about today. And this was very, very exciting. This shaped my line of research moving forward because I've become very excited about how individuals' early social experiences may actually influence the information that they choose to encode, both at an early age, but potentially throughout their lifetimes as well. And so that was early work that has influenced our directions in ecology, evolution, and neuroscience. And I do want to take some time to tell you more about an ongoing project in the lab that links projects about vocal information encoding in different social environments and research software development. And so here, this project very much relies on simulated data and modeling approaches. And so you may be able to imagine that working with parrots is very, very challenging. So these are very intelligent, highly social animals that are also able to fly very long distances. So it's very difficult to collect data from a bird that is constantly moving all the time. And if you can't mark them, then you don't know which bird produced which vocalization. And in addition, it's very hard to know which individuals are socially interacting and how those social interactions change over time. And so we can use modeling approaches or computational approaches to ask questions about how social interactions or variation in social environments change vocalizations in ways that would be very, very difficult to do if we were to focus only on studying the animals themselves. And so this is a line of research that my lab started building soon after I arrived at MSU, so starting last summer. We started by figuring out a way to represent vocalizations in modeling experiments in a computationally efficient way. And the solution that we came up with was to represent vocalizations as character strings. And so with these character strings, we can decide how many of those letters are shared or different between classes at different social levels, in this case, 2 different groups. And so here you can see character strings that are group specific. And I'll walk you through this a bit more. I've put little colored bars over the letters in these character strings that are group specific. And the pipeline that we've developed also allows us to convert those character strings into synthetic audio files. We do this by assigning each letter, each unique letter in those character strings, a different directional change in frequency, and that allows us to map information encoding between character strings and audio files themselves. And so here you can see 2 different audio files representing these group-specific vocalizations. And I've highlighted again the structural features of those frequency modulation patterns between these vocalizations that are unique to each group. And I do want to show you some examples of what these calls sound like. So this is going to be a call for group number 1. Okay, that's group number 1, and this is going to be group number 2. Excellent. I also want to show you what a parakeet call sounds like in real time. Okay, it sounds very, very similar, but if we slow down these patterns, so this is the call slowed down to quarter time, and you can really hear those rolling changes in frequency over time. This is what we are simulating with these synthetic vocalizations. And I'll play the second one more time. So these synthetic vocalizations are very biologically relevant. When I play them at home, my parrots at home respond to them almost immediately, so they are recognizing them as bird-like signals. And these data sets allow us to go in many different directions now for different types of modeling research. One direction that we're building up is using modeling approaches to ask how social environments selected for the evolution of vocal learning, or our ability as humans to even learn from others as well. And other directions include testing different computational pipelines to actually detect information in these vocalizations. So one problem we have in the field that I work in is that it's often very difficult to know if you're actually detecting the information that the animals themselves are encoding. And when you have synthetic data sets like this, when you know the information that was encoded and you even know where, this becomes a very powerful baseline for asking how different methods are able to capture information in these complex signals. I also want to highlight that this is research performed by the very first member of my lab. Arlena, or Ari Cross, was an REU, or Research Experiences for Undergraduate Students, through a program offered here for undergraduates through ICER, as well as ACRES, which stands for the Advanced Computational Research Experiences for Undergrads program. This was an excellent summer research project for Ari, and I'm really grateful for her generous time and creativity, and being willing to throw her data science skills at a completely new problem in a new domain. And this line of research also involves work by a collaborator, Dr. Vanessa Ferdinand at the University of Melbourne. And so we're very excited for the next steps, and we're already working on the first labs paper. Now, I believe I may have a little bit of time, Melody, please correct me if I'm wrong, okay, to tell you a little bit more about some of the research that links our interest in neuroscience and research software development in the lab. And this is work done in service of trying to understand more about how animals' early life or developmental experiences influence the information that they choose to encode in learned vocalizations. And so this is work that I could talk about as a whole separate talk, but I'm going to try to go through it quickly in the interest of time. Here I've put up a very busy slide. This is a slide showing you a nest container that has lots of different movement sensors connected to it. This nest container is part of a behavioral tracking system that I co-developed with collaborators at Rockefeller University, the University of Cincinnati, and a software developer working outside of academia. And I've been working on this system over the last 4 years now. So this nest container that I built out of PVC allows us to mount different types of movement sensors around a nest container to track the activity of adult songbirds entering or leaving a nest container. And the songbirds that we're working with are zebra finches, these small Australian songbirds that you may have seen. They're very popular in the pet trade, and they've been used as a model system in neuroscience, especially for the last 40 years. And so I'm very interested in linking variation in parental care, which forms a very important part of animals' early social experiences, to variation in the vocalizations that they produce as adults. And so this system allows us to automatically capture patterns of activity performed by adults at these nest containers. These sensors include lasers or infrared beam breakers to ask when birds are coming in and out of a container and the directionality of movement. We also have an RFID or radio frequency identification system, which allows us to track individual identity to some degree. And we have a camera that records using infrared LEDs by motion detection throughout 24 hours all of the time. And I want to see if I can show you a video of what some of these behaviors that we capture look like. So I'm going to open a video here, and I'm going to move it over to this screen. Right, and let's play this. So this is going to be a very short video, and let me narrate first before I play it. So in this video, this is a bird's eye view into a nest container. You can see a door at the back, which allows us to reach in and access nestlings for different types of measurements. There's a temperature probe here on the wall, and in the middle of the container entrance is a circular custom-built RFID antenna. In the nest container itself, you're seeing two birds. The female is here, sort of ruffling her feathers, and the male is down here. This was a video taken at night, and this was a rare video when both adults were in the nest container overnight together. And so what you should be able to see is the female rolling the eggs around. This is a very important behavior for developmental purposes to make sure that basically the materials inside of the egg don't get stuck to part of the eggshell itself. That is one example of one interesting behavior that we've seen here. And I also want to show you one more example. These are chicks in the nest. And there you can see the male entering, jumping on top of the chicks, and then shortly after that started a feeding bout. So let me play that one more time. Yes, so the male jumps in, settles on top of the nestlings, and does a feeding bout after, which I'm not showing. But what I'm very excited about is that this system allows us to address behavioral questions at many different levels of resolution. One level of resolution is asking questions about overall patterns of activity. And by integrating data across these different sensors, we can reduce the amount of time that a person, including undergrad researchers, have to stare at these videos for hours and hours and hours at a time, right? This is incredibly intensive work. And I like to tell people that when I first started this line of research, my bright idea was to score these videos myself. And one of my supervisors at the time said, I need you to calculate exactly how much time this is going to take. And I did. And I calculated that if I worked 13 hours a day without eating, without taking breaks, for all the videos I wanted to score to collect behavioral data, it would take me 2 years working continuously to extract all the data that I needed. And so you'll be hearing more about this sort of getting to the science faster, I think, in Dirk Colbury's talk. This is very much in line of where I want my lab to be moving. We are starting to apply deep learning tools to the videos themselves as well for finer scale resolution of the behaviors that are occurring, again, without needing to rely on humans sacrificing their valuable time. And so I want to thank the current members of my lab right now. So my lab grew very quickly over the last year. We have a lot of research going on, including setting up a songbird colony here on campus and setting up collaborative work with parrots at an external research site as well as getting the computational research up and running. And so I needed a lot of hands on deck, and working with this lab it's honestly the best part of my job these days. So Brittany Coppinger is a postdoc in the lab, Summer Eckhart is a graduate student on the biology side, Madison Honore is a master's student on the CMSE side, and Raneem and Alexandra are research assistants, one on the data science side and one on the avian behavior side. We also are very fortunate to have 4 undergraduate researchers who are hard at work doing some of this manual scoring of the songbird videos so that we can begin applying these deep learning tools. And actually, Madison right now and Raneem have been working on these deep learning applications to the songbird videos. Now, this research that I've shown you it spans over a decade of research at this point. Science is truly a collaborative and team effort. And so I hope you can see by the number of names on the slide and also the number of funding sources that I truly have been lucky to have a lot of support from my community as well as different funding organizations to make all of this research possible today. And I'd like to give a special shout out to the College of Natural Sciences, Integrative Biology, and CMSE for supporting the research in my lab at this early stage in my career. And I'd like to end by just saying that code switching really is a universal human experience that we all share, as I talked about earlier, but it is not unique to humans. And so something that I didn't say earlier, because I wanted to end with this, is that these parrots that I was telling you about, these yellow-naped Amazons that live in parts of Mesoamerica and have regional vocal dialects, these birds are actually bidialectal as well. And so this map that you can see up here, you may be able to see in the very center, there's some triangles in this gray polygon. The triangles divide the circles and the squares below. Those triangles are sites where my PhD supervisor recorded these birds calling in the 2 regional dialects that this species displays in this part of its native range. And so this paper was my motivation for getting into the research that I do now, but also my lived experiences growing up in a bicultural family and wanting to learn more about this universal human experience truly did lead me here as well. And so if you're interested in talking more about the science itself, learning more about the papers that we're working on, or talking more about code switching and how this overlaps with animal research, please do check out my lab's website or feel free to be in touch by email. Thank you.
So we had a couple of questions submitted online, and if anyone in the audience has a question, we encourage you to grab this mic or the other one on the other side of the room so that our friends who are joining us online can also hear your inquiries. So we had a question submitted online regarding your research. They said the themes tied to your research seem really relevant to the human immigration and even anthropology. Have you explored applying your work across different species or even the human population? If so, they would love to hear it.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and also sets this up nicely. So a potential future direction I have been thinking quite a lot about, especially in my capacity as an 1855 professor, is how the work that we do with animals directly links to the experience of immigrants in different parts of the world. And so this is part of my lived experience as well. So I grew up in a mixed status family, at least for most of my life. And now my family continues to have that sort of presence in different parts of the world. And so personally, I'm very invested in wanting to link the research that I do to learning more about these human experiences. I do have much less experience on the human language side of things. And so I am starting to look for collaborators who may be interested in doing that. And this is really one of the reasons I'm very excited about being at MSU. MSU is a truly collaborative place. Right now I'm split between 2 departments, Integrative Biology, Computational Math, Science, and Engineering. And I think that MSU is a place where I can start to build ties like that, to link the research that we do, or at least our findings, to research done by others with human migrant populations especially. Thank you. We
have other questions that were submitted online. do parakeets that live in urban habitats versus rural habitats have different forms of communication? Do they sound different?
Yeah, oh, that's also an excellent question. So something I didn't tell you all about when I was telling you about these calls that the parakeets produce and how they're simpler in the introduced range and more complex in the native range is that we also did record the native range parakeets in cities and in rural areas. And we did find an effect of the urban area that we think is really important. So we also found slightly simpler calls in native range birds that were in cities. And so we think it's possible that cities, when the birds move into cities, their local population sizes also change, and that may be similar to what's happening in their introduced range. So this is work that I would love to continue to expand further, but I do want to make sure to build more collaborations with folks in South America where those birds currently reside. Yeah, thank you.
When is it beneficial to communicate group versus individual information?
Yeah, thank you for that question as well. I think this is something we are still learning a lot about. But what I can tell you is that, at least for parrots, and I'm very parrot biased because this is where I did a lot of my training, parrots are animals that live in varying environments that change all year round. So their food sources are often spatially distributed in very different ways, and they need to learn where the food is distributed, but the distribution of food also changes over time. So there's a lot of spatio-temporal complexity in where to find food. And it is very likely that parrots need to rely on other animals or other individuals in their groups to access group knowledge about those changing patterns of food over time. And if that's the case, then communicating group membership and vocalizations would be really critically important. But there's and these are ideas I really want to test in some of the computational work that we're doing. As the number of individuals that you're communicating with changes, it becomes difficult to predict whether or not it's more beneficial to communicate group or individual information. And we see that in human language as well. We also see that with other animals. So a lot of these animals and humans as well were able to encode a lot of information in a single vocalization, even in those frequency modulation patterns I was telling you about. So a single vocalization can hold information about both group membership and individual identity. Yeah, thanks. And I can talk about this for far too long. So if others have other questions, please feel free to throw them my way or come find me individually after. I'd be happy to talk more. Yeah, thank you.